Welcome to Ventures from the Valley, a podcast by R136 Ventures. This is the show where we highlight the biggest topics in business and investment with some of the biggest experts in the space to help you learn how to grow your portfolio in venture capital. I'm Victor Orlovski. This was a podcast, Ventures from the Valley, brought to you by Victor Orlovski, R136 Ventures. Alex Freedland, founder and CEO of Mirantis, was with us today. Thank you. Alex Freedland, my good friend, founder of many companies. Welcome to the studio, podcast Ventures from the Valley. So we start. Alex, my first question, how many companies did you found in your life? Can you count? Do you remember?
Well, I probably could, but I have to take some time. Not that many, between 5 and 10, but closer to 5.
Okay, so 5 to 10. Okay, that's something. So maybe you can just deep dive a little bit into your story. So I know that you spent your early childhood in Russia, in Soviet Union, right? And then you started up your business basically in your teenage, right? When you were a teenager. So,
well, not really. I mean, I was in my 20s. No, I came here when I was a teenager. I came here in the US at the age of 19 as part of the Jewish immigration that we had. Was called refuseniks, for those who still remember that word. But so I came here at 19, went to school, actually finished my master's part-time and worked for a number of companies as an employee. And then when I was 20, probably, I'm trying to remember, 25 or 26, that's when I started my first business.
And what was your first employer before you started your own business?
My first employer was a little startup that I was recommended for when I just landed. And it was a little company called LPCom. And I was, what would you call it? Today, you would call it a DevOps engineer. But actually, I was responsible for builds. And at that time, those who are in technology remember, make files and batch files and all that. That's what I was doing for a little startup. And I remember that I had 2 challenges at the time. The first challenge was to learn enough English and to be able to speak freely. So I would learn a page of vocabulary a day. So I had a dictionary, Russian English dictionary, and I would open the random page and all the words I didn't know, I would memorize. And then those I couldn't understand, I would go to different people in the company. It was a small enough company. I would ask them what exactly this word meant. And the other one, I was very curious to see how companies work. So I was in a little department within engineering, but I was going around and talking to marketing and customer service and all those guys to kind of understand how all of this works together, because I couldn't verbalize it, but I thought to myself that one day I'll probably have a startup, or I didn't even call it a startup, but I wanted to understand how companies work. So that was my first employer.
And what did you learn finally? Why you decided to start your own business after all? Was it like a great success? I mean, a huge exit and your founders brought home a lot of cash. So what was your motivation to start finally your own business?
My motivation was, I would probably say, was a negative motivation. So I wanted to go from engineering to management, and very quickly I understood that I'm not a very excellent engineer. I mean, I was good enough. I was good enough to get jobs and do my work well. But compared to the brilliant people I had to not necessarily compete with, but saw that who were capable of being just excellent programmers, I just wasn't as strong. But one thing I was really strong at was in talking to people, building relationships, and specifically explaining to non-technical people what is it that our technical department does, so they could understand, and then take things that the non-technical people wanted and explain it to technical people so they could relate to it and do it. And for that, being in management was probably a good position in the company. So very quickly I developed, I grew into management, and it was my 3rd or 4th company. I was a head of a department for another startup that was in building software for healthcare. We had very large customers like Kaiser and Veteran Affairs and all that.
It was mid-90s, right? I mean, what timing can we talk about?
1994, I would say. I would go.
So it was prior to .com era, right?
It was prior to the dot-com era, yes. And so what happened then was I worked and, I guess a young immigrant, plus I was specifically actually motivated to build something that was interesting. I remember that when I started, I worked 7 weeks in a row without a weekend. So I worked 49 days in a row. And that it didn't feel like a sacrifice, but we did a lot of things well and we moved the needle and all that. And it was a little company, maybe 60, 70, 80 people, I don't know. And the management for this company all came as a result of an acquisition. They actually left. Borland bought DBase many, many moons ago. And those were all the management from DBase. So they all worked together and they knew each other and they were quite a bit older. And my VP, was a smart guy. And then all my peers were quite a bit older and we all did work. And I was actually helping these guys, one of them in particular, to be successful. So I was doing the UI part of the application. He was doing the database part, but he wasn't particularly strong and he would come for advice all the time. I would help him and do a lot of work for him. And I didn't mind doing that because it was whatever. And then after a year, we got a review and I got a glowing review, either outstanding or exceeds expectation on everything. And then I get a 2% raise and then they restructure and they make this guy my boss, the one that I was helping, which again, I didn't mind, but it kind of felt weird. So I asked the VP, I said, how come 2%? He said, well, look at you. You are already at the 95th percentile of the salaries. So there's nowhere for you to grow in the salary. So we gave you 2% as a thank you because otherwise we should give you 0. You're already too high. And, as far as your growth, look at you. You're like 25 or 26 and all your peers are in their 40s. Just give it a couple more years. The company will grow. There'll be more opportunity. You'll get another promotion and that's how you grow. And I thought to myself, well, I guess if I were to stay here, I'll have to wait for those, geezers to retire or the company to grow and all those things I don't control. And life is happening here and now. So I said, okay, I understand. And thank you for explaining. So I finished the project and I quit. I didn't feel like I have to wait until, just give me half a second. Okay. I'll put my phone on do not disturb. People send me things. I just didn't feel like I needed to wait for some external events to happen for me to be able to kind of live life. Right. And do things that I felt were interesting. And it was sort of a very unusual decision for a Soviet immigrant at the time because we all depended on something, right? And so my parents actually were quite terrified because at that time I had a child and I had, another one on the way and I had a mortgage and I was the sole breadwinner. And so the idea of just quitting without having an income when I have to pay mortgages, well, you and I know both, right? It is, right? But at that time, I wasn't worried. My dad was very worried. My mom was actually quite supportive. She's like, I'm sure you'll figure this out. My wife at the time was terrified, but very supportive.
Okay, good. So you had a lot of support. You were a very impatient young boy and you wanted to start something. So did you have any big idea? Did you have anything a crazy idea to work on? So what you started working on? Why? You chosen what you've chosen.
I knew how to do and I knew how to develop software and talk to people. So I went out and I built a consultancy to just do consulting programming work. And very quickly through my network and contacts and this and that, I got projects. The first project, I don't even remember what it did, was with this little small entrepreneur. And we said, okay, so I hired a team of 2 people and they gave me a prepayment and I've done work. And then when it was time to actually pay me for the work I finished, the guy said, oh, my customer didn't sign, I'm out of money and therefore I cannot pay you. And of course, I said, well, but we did it and there's a contract and everything. He says, well, but I don't have the money. So I said, okay, we're going to sue him. So I called my friend lawyer, we sued him, we got a judgment. And the guy just moved to a different state and the judgment wasn't very useful. So I realized that, the fact that something's written on a contract, you have to be practical about those kind of things. Luckily, the money that he paid as a deposit was big enough to pay the people I hired. So I just, got a learning experience to work for free. I was the main contributor to this. I did probably 60% of the work and the 2 hired guns did 40. So I did that for free, but got a learning experience. So I think it was a fair exchange. That was kind of the first. And then one thing led to another interesting one. I got a project at Netscape, actually, a contracting project at Netscape, where I had to do some very uninspiring work, but on site at Netscape, just as they went public, and I saw, that culture that became the .com culture, right? With dogs roaming and people kind of in all these weird ways and, quite amazing. And I was doing something very uninspiring. My job was to localize Netscape, what was it? The browser, right? Netscape browser for big enterprises. So make sure that it has an AT&T logo as opposed to something else, right? And somebody had to do it. They paid me quite well. I was very happy with that, but it didn't require a lot of difficult work. And I realized also that I always kind of put myself into places where I had to do amazing things and compete with the top 1% and come back, probably come out not quite good enough, but compared to the remaining 80%, I was actually quite good. And there was quite a demand for my services in engineering. And in fact, Netscape wanted to hire me full time. But at that time, I already kind of sniffed the air and I said, I don't think you guys will survive. I think Microsoft will eat you lunch. So I wasn't interested. Plus, I wasn't interested in going back into a corporate world. So what happened was one of the little contracts brought me to a company that was trying to build a product, rebuild it to a brand new technology. And she brought me in. And it was a very, very curious situation. There was a tiny little company that was building what's called, they had a recovery software, which is it's financial services. Essentially, it's a boring financial services thing. You're correct. So the gist of the story is that it was a project that was impossible to do. And the guy who brought me into this said, it's impossible. I'm not going to do it. So I said, well, if you're not going to do it, let me try direct. He said, just so long as you pay me a commission, you can do whatever you want. So I went and I kind of saw this. And the deal was to take their product and make it good for GE Capital, which is a big, massive customer. And we had to take it live in Japan in 6 months. And if not, there were immense penalties. And I thought to myself, well, those penalties are not mine. And what I can do is I can do the best work we can, get paid for that. And then when we have to take it live to GE, we're so fast and GE is so slow. By the time they will have a problem, we'll fix it 17 times over. So there's no risk. Well, I knew it. Yeah. So we took that project and that project became basically the foundation of everything else that happened that eventually led to Mirantis and many, many other things. And that's why I'm kind of dwelling this a little bit.
So you developed something what became mainstream, actually, right?
We developed something that we actually built for a big customer. That big customer actually bought it from us, and we did successfully implement it in Japan. And then they took it for another 12 sites worldwide, and that gave my customer a product that they started to sell. Then it turned out that they were not equipped to go after big enterprise market, and they needed all kinds of help. And I was providing that help. And then it was obvious that they needed money and scale and all that. And I used my connections to bring an angel investor. And as a result, we merged our companies and I sold my services company to that product company and became head of engineering and all things technical and a co-founder and EVP and all the titles and owning 6% of the overall funded business. And in about 18 months, when we actually as a group decided that we're going to focus on 2 verticals and we're going to dominate those verticals in the market, and dominating meant we're going to win more than 50% of all the deals happening in these verticals worldwide. And we focused on that. We hired for that and we actually done it. And when we done it, the competitor that was much, much larger came in and just bought this company. And what was interesting is that was kind of the first very interesting feedback where you kind of see how your strategy plays out in the open, right? When they did the acquisition, they made an announcement to do, there was a UK company, so it would do it every 6 months. And they coincided the announcement and their 6 months report. And they said, certain company appeared in California that started to take our business away in those very verticals that we were focusing. And so as a response to that, we would like to buy them. And then we just bought them, right? So that's exactly, our strategy as a niche player, going after very, very large market actually worked out and we successfully exited.
So that was your first cash, right? First cash.
Well, my first cash I did through kind of services and I made quite a bit of profit through that. But
I mean, a real exit, right? Yeah.
My first exit was, in 1999 Now, it was a weird exit because we were actually much larger than many of those .com companies. We had double-digit revenue in millions and growing very fast. But the owner of the company was an older gentleman who just wanted to retire. So he chose to take a very, very low valuation. It was three times forward-looking revenue, but he wanted
Very
it
low
all
for that
cash,
times.
small. Yeah. And it was amazing because a company in order of magnitude smaller than us in the same building as us called Octane Systems sold literally within a month from us, sold to Epiphany for $3.2 billion.
And what was the price for the company you worked for? What was that?
We sold for $42 million.
42. Okay. That's a big gap, right?
It's
and
why
it was just a founder who decided, right?
The founder,
that's a good enough deal for him.
Retire was good enough for him. And I was very unhappy. I was so unhappy, I can't tell you, but we're talking August 1999. And he said, Alex, you haven't seen the world, you haven't seen life. In a couple of years, when things will settle, you will think it's actually a very, very good deal. And indeed, in a couple of years, when the bubble burst, those companies that survived, their market caps went down 150, 200x. And so, and of course, all these multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, they had lockups with stocks. It's not that you could just get cash. I mean, maybe you can get portions of it. And the company that bought you would go down 100x or more. The company that bought us ended up going down. They were worth 10 billion pounds at the time they bought us. Then they went to $100 million. And then eventually they got bought by Fair Isaac for $300 million. So if we just, waited and kind of saw that, at the peak, it was the equivalent of selling for $4.5 billion. So in the end, our cash stayed with us and it turned out to be a good deal. But it didn't seem that way at all at the time. So okay, it was a good learning experience.
Yeah, it's a very good learning experience indeed. Yeah. So tell me, Mirantis. So Mirantis is your main baby, right? If I ask you what's the company you founded, probably your answer would be Mirantis, right? Because it's like probably the biggest thing you founded so far.
It's the better known, I suppose, and it's not the biggest. The other biggest ones are not something that we discuss. Yes.
Okay, you will definitely tell this story as well. But and I'm curious to hear. So can you tell a little bit about Mirantis? So Mirantis is what it is now in terms of size, revenue, and you founded this company as a founder and CEO, right? And then you left the company for a while, serving at the board. And now you're back in CEO chair, right? So interesting journey, and maybe you can just explore a little bit and tell more about this.
Sure. So Mirantis, as it is today, is very different from Mirantis that we started because it went through multiple gyrations and pivots. But today it's a cloud infrastructure business. We are about a little over 120 million in revenue and north of $100 million in ARR. We're profitable, and we are basically serving Kubernetes and OpenStack, which is the private cloud infrastructure, to close to 1,000 customers all over the world. So we are, we're in the Gartner segment. We're a niche player because the ones we're competing with are AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure on the left, VMware, and IBM, Red Hat on the right. So being a niche player in this multi-trillion-dollar market is actually an honorable place to be. But we didn't start like that. We started as a little outsourcing company that wanted to replicate the success we had engineering-wise with my first company. And really why we started is because we had a little Russian R&D center at the time, because when we raised angel money in the 90s, we couldn't compete in the Valley for all the talent with all the .coms. So I actually went to Russia for the first time ever, since I left. And I started a little R&D center that grew and became very successful. And when we were acquired, the buyer, who was a UK public company, did not want to own Russian assets. So they spun it out into a little company that I was allowed to manage on a cost plus relationship. And when the internet bubble started to burst, I said, well, I don't want to waste my time just kind of, watching this big company going through all those gyrations. How about I actually use the globalization that's happening and try to build the same model that we've built for ourselves and offer it to the world. And I started the Russian outsourcing company with the acquirer, London Bridge Software, becoming my first customer. And for the first probably 8 years, we were building an outsourcing business. But again, I was very stubborn and not very wise because I continued to make the same mistake I made with my own career. I wanted to focus on the 1%, the most smartest and all. And plus, of course, Russian talent had to find differentiation against the Indian talent that was everywhere. And so what happened was we went after very hard to solve problems in very esoteric fields on the product development side of the house. So we helped companies build their products. And where we actually were sticky were places like EDA, which is, CAD for chip design, extremely complex, extremely mathematical. We were able to find our space there, and other semiconductor companies like KLA Tencor, and then infrastructure companies like Cisco and Veritas and Isilon and a bunch of others. Very, very complicated. But every time we'd prove ourselves, the customer would look at us and say, you're so good, you're so strategic. How about we just buy your team? So it would never scale. It was very, very hard because we competed with those who were in, number one and number two in the world in the very field they dominated. So what it led to was a good business that produced quite a bit of cash flow, and we were very successful, and the quality of life was very good, but nothing that would create shareholder value and would scale for the reasons I just described. So by the time Lehman collapse came, we found ourselves, with maybe 200 some people and a lot of customers that were dependent on capital by way of running their business, whether it's semiconductor equipment or hardware companies and all that. And if you remember at that time,
you bootstrapped this company, right? So you didn't really raise any capital, right? So
for services, you don't need to, right? Mm-hmm. So we bootstrapped it. But at that time, when our customers, the credit froze, they cut very, very deep, and we lost overnight 40% of all our customers. But our contracts were smart, so to cut us, they had to pay us a lot of money. So we got a lot of cash, very, very, very smart people, basically in infrastructure space and compute, storage, and network, and an understanding that as an outsourcing company was subscale and it's probably not interesting for us to continue that. So we said, okay, let's find something else. And we did a few things. We tried a couple of mergers. We were looking at the new things were happening at the time. And the two things were happening at the time were either cloud or big data. And so we looked at this and said, we have to go all in one of them. And we looked at big data, and there were Cloudera and Hortonworks already funded and running away. And then the infrastructure, it was very, very nascent. And we said, we have to become an infrastructure company. So we looked around and we said, okay, what is cloud? We said to ourselves, cloud is not a technology. Cloud is actually a different way of owning a computer resource. Just like the first generation was IBM mainframe, a huge box that, only a few people could afford, right? Then the personal computers came, and personal computers would be a much cheaper box, and a lot of people can afford it. As the price goes down by order of magnitude, the market grows by several orders of magnitude. Cloud is the same thing. You buy a tiny little portion of virtual computing resource. It costs you nothing. And the price of ownership goes down, means the market will grow orders of magnitude. And how do you play this? Well, you play this by going at the operating system layer, like Microsoft did, own that, and then go up the stack. So what's an operating layer of cloud? It's called IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. What kind of infrastructure as a service it needs to be? Well, it's the one that everybody will embrace because they're all afraid of Amazon and others. So it needs to be open source and a big community. Once we understood that, we looked around.
Can you a little bit explain here, when you say afraid of Amazon and others, what do you mean? Why they should be afraid of Amazon? Why a user should be afraid of Amazon or Google or Microsoft?
The user should not, although they should too. They should be careful, and it's a deeper discussion. But so public clouds came about probably 10 years earlier, right? At the turn of the century, AWS started this whole notion of the cloud, where essentially they pioneered the idea that IT could be bought as a service. So just like Salesforce pioneered the idea of software as a service, and they used what are they selling? The sales automation software, right? So the sales automation software was just a use case for them to deliver software as a service. The same level of innovation came from AWS. They were the first ones who understood and pioneered the way to sell IT as a service. And when people understood it, essentially everybody just went and took their credit card and started to buy computing and storage and networking all as a service. And the speed with which this adoption happened was just incredible. And when you look at it, if you are an infrastructure company, if you're in the business of selling servers, or you're in the business of selling storage systems, if you're in the business of selling network systems or databases or what have you, you're extremely threatened, as well as, data centers, as well as, cooling and all that, because suddenly Amazon just gives somebody an API, and then what they have underneath, nobody cares. And then Amazon can just, instead of buying Dell computers, can build their own like Google did. And the margin they will pay to people, even like Intel, will be whatever they can negotiate, which is a lot less than Intel can sell elsewhere. So if this wave cannot be stopped, all these companies are going to be destroyed. And the amount of innovation that's required and the speed of the adoption and all is such that no one company, except maybe for very, very large ones like Microsoft and others, can actually compete. So they need to pool their resources and create an alternative platform and APIs and all that will give an alternative to that movement with the same price. So that's why all those companies got terrified. And that's why they all got together to figure out how to survive in the world of public clouds. Now, what we're seeing is it actually played out similarly, because it's very difficult to survive in the world of public clouds. And we're seeing what happens to companies like HP and, NetApp and all those other ones. They're surviving, but they're not necessarily thriving. And Amazon in the meantime is worth, trillions of dollars. But there is a viable alternative to Amazon's now because of this industry and because of this motion. And our bet was correct. And ultimately, it's a whole different discussion that we can have in, role of open source and infrastructure as source of innovation to compete with governments. Yeah, but we understood this much better than other people at the time. And we understood that go-to-market and open source is really a go-to-market more so than technology. And then we jumped on that, basically on that wagon very, very early. And we committed all ourselves to becoming an OpenStack company before everybody really understood what OpenStack was. And this created a very interesting transformation that's not very common, that a services company just doing outsourcing and, IT services, of which there are probably millions, within 2 years became a leader in cloud technologies. And we had a line outside of our door of investors, and our market cap from where we started to within, what was it? 2011, we started, end of, 2013, we got December 2012, we got our first round. And then in 15, we got our third round. We grew from 5 million when we started in market cap to 500 million, actually more, 600 million in 2015. So that created tremendous market, value appreciation. And it's very atypical for a services company to make this kind of a pivot. So that was a very, very interesting period of our lives.
Maybe we can still discuss a little bit of this topic. So public clouds, 3 major players. And then you mentioned it's on the left hand, and then on the right hand, you have VMwares of this world and yes. Red Hats, and you're in between. So yes. What kind of customers still would prefer public, and what kind of customers would go the right wing with VMwares of this world? And what kind of customers would fit best into your niche? And what is expanding faster? For me, public clouds are winning the world of cloud compute slowly but steadily, right? So they push things and other players out of game, basically, slowly but steadily. So how do you see this evolution of cloud overall? And do you see a place for companies like Mirantis or companies like VMware in this market going forward?
Well, it's a complex question. And as we're discussing it, please guide me, because I don't want to rat hole, because I know so much about this business that I can go infinitely deep, and yet I can also skip over certain things because I kind of assume that everybody understands it. So please be.
I believe that people who are listening to us will understand it. Yeah.
So overall, I think I agree that public clouds are winning the cloud battle, cloud war, and the percentage of public cloud real estate for workloads is steadily increasing. Having said that, if you look at it from an overall percentage of all the computing resources, where the public clouds are, they're still maybe in the teens. Most workloads today, especially in the large enterprises, are on-prem.
Right.
And on-prem,
which is weird, right? I just see it, and I think it's like, yeah, it's legacy. Yeah,
it's legacy, and it's complicated. And when I say on-prem, it means not just on-prem and cloud, but a lot of it is just pure virtualization. And I think the largest asset by way of workloads is VMware, which is not cloud. It's just virtualization, right? Managing VMs and pressing one button to migrate the VM and then back, and there's like no cloud at all. And that's 90% of VMware business, which by itself, just on the software side, is about 15 billion. And then a whole bunch of it is running on bare metals or on some weird hardware on mainframes and all. So the world has been going to this for 70 years now in the computing era, and public clouds they're taking a large percentage of net new business, but not all. So I think when you look where the world is going to be a decade or two from now, I think we're going to live in a hybrid world, hybrid multi-cloud world, because computing as a resource is a strategically important resource, and it's very nuanced because it depends on your situation, on your economics, on your regulation, on your risk profile, on your type of workload, on your ability to deliver it to customer on edge at a certain time, speed, and whatever, and many, many other parameters. And as we're learning, public clouds cannot fit them all. And also public clouds are becoming extremely, extremely expensive. And public cloud business models are not optimized to the point where if you are a customer at scale, they will give you a discount so that they're not going to have their 25, 30% margin. Because no matter how big you are as an individual customer compared to Amazon's business, you are subscale. And if I give you discount just because you're very large, then I have to give it to all the others, and I'm going to lose points in my margin and hundreds of billions of dollars in market cap. So they're like, no, right? So we have customers, for example, that are building massive assets in their own data centers, where if they were to put this in Amazon, the difference in ownership would be like 7x. So yeah. So if you're small, it doesn't make sense. But at scale, in today's pricing and all, economics of...
Do you foresee that pricing will change dramatically? Because probably public clouds will want to win larger businesses. I'm sure that Fortune 500 companies have little to do with public clouds in at least their core businesses.
They do quite a bit. A lot of them, yes. I think that there will be price competition more and more. But I think it's not just the price, but price also. Because if I go and I optimize my infrastructure specifically for my business, and I have my own network and my own this and my own that for a very specific thing, smart companies can always get better result than doing it in Amazon if they choose to. Because Amazon's cost includes, among other things, not just the price of hardware and all that, where they can be very, very competitive and probably better than anybody else, but also the price of selling, right? The cost of sales is actually a very, very expensive layer of Amazon's business that if I'm building my own, I don't have to do, and the margin. And if you look at every business, there are probably, 20% of a business is cost of selling, and then their margins are 20% plus. So there's a 40% markup on the cost that Amazon has to have a sustainable business, right? So even if my hardware is, 30% more efficient, I'm not going to be able to give you a better price.
So it does not offset well with the economy of business, basically. So yeah, there is some economy of business of scale, right? Economy of scale, but not enough to justify the sales costs and your profit margins.
Correct. So when it comes to an economic competition at scale, in the end, the on-prem people can find a way to compete. Now, the challenge is what is driving, cloud adoption. And the main reason for cloud adoption is not necessarily cost, but more the speed with which you can move, right? The just-in-time ability to deploy resources just in time and having enough services so developers can actually develop software better. And you don't have to wait for hardware to be delivered, for data center to be built, for software on-prem to be not ideally suited for speed. This is the main driver for cloud adoption. And as open source mostly is driving that, but as the tools on-prem for cloud infrastructure that are available out there are becoming more sophisticated, the competition is actually becoming stronger. And there's a large flow of workloads going back from public clouds to private. And more CIOs are deciding that the future is in a hybrid multi-cloud, where ultimately the workload can live anywhere. There should be an abstraction layer that will allow you to build the workload to that abstraction layer, and where it's physically located doesn't matter. Sometimes economics will allow it. Sometimes regulation will allow it. Like in Europe, for example, there is very, very specific regulation about where the workload needs to be, nationally, and for this and for that. And it's much easier to build for this within your own business. And then there are political risks, especially now that we're deglobalizing, we're seeing that some geographies want to work only with these geographies, but not with those. Some actually want to have both. I was just in Singapore, and in Singapore, you must have Huawei stand up and an American company. They want to make sure they have both, and they want to have vendors that are able to work with Huawei and with American ones. But since Huawei is under sanctions, no American company can work with Huawei. So it's a problem.
Politics goes into technology now. Deep.
Yes,
right?
Regulation.
More problems for CTOs.
I don't know if I'm a CIO or a CTO. Politics is just one constraint I have to deal with. If I'm in medical, there is HIPAA. If I'm in finance, there's all kinds, right? It's just one more.
So if you're a CTO, Alex, what would be your biggest challenge building up a hybrid cloud these days? What would be like the challenge? What would go wrong, right? If you're building up this hybrid environment for your business?
Well, right now is just a very, very difficult technological challenge, right? We're not quite there yet as far as where the world is. And of course, if I'm Amazon or Google or what have you, I'm not interested in multi-cloud. I'm interested in everything being in mine. So what you do is you create economics, for example, where putting your workload and data onto Amazon costs you nothing, but God forbid you want that data back to yours, they'll charge you an exorbitant fee that, will be, you're not going to be willing to pay to repatriate, right? So you have to think about that when you are designing this. And then, there's workload gravity and many other things. So just recently, a technology that is called Kubernetes has become sophisticated enough and ubiquitous enough where that can be used as the ultimate abstraction for all things cloud. And now that pretty much the world has accepted that Kubernetes is like a Linux of the cloud, you can actually use it as a platform to then work across every single possible infrastructure. And everybody will write to it, just like people do to Linux and all that, right? So we're opening. And then there's a whole bunch of technical and management and, optimization problems that people have to solve. Security is another one. Yes. So a lot.
How big is security? When you're just building up a hybrid cloud, are you jeopardizing your security a lot? Is it kind of a big thing?
Not really, because every large company today is multi-cloud. It's just not hybrid. Multi-cloud means they have an Amazon part of the infrastructure, and they have Google part of infrastructure, and they have Red Hat part of
not to put everything into one basket, basically.
Yes, but usually what they do is they have a very specific, we use Amazon for this, and we use Google for this, and we use, VMware for this. And it's not like you move those workloads or you change, you're flexible by way of when and how. So that's the next generation challenge. And if you're able to solve that, so there's a complicated management of all of this. And then ability to migrate, ability to move, all of that, that just hasn't been built yet. It's aspirational. Companies are doing this, and Mirantis is doing this, but we believe that's where the world is going in the next 4 or 5 years. This is where, where the battle is going to be. Because otherwise, if we lose that battle, then the customers will be beholden to just 1 or 2 players. And for a resource as strategic as computing, that will create an, economic imbalance, and nobody can afford that.
So an ultimate goal of Mirantis is to basically build up this layer, right? That makes customers agnostic to basically an infrastructure, right? So you can just utilize any bare metal, any infrastructure behind Mirantis software, seamlessly working with data and management tools and everything around any kind of data being kept within your platforms.
Yes. Well, yes. So you're asking now a little bit different question as to what is Mirantis's play in all of this, right? And it's a difficult question, and partially I came back to to give an answer to this very question, right? Because being a subscale player, likely able to control our own destiny, we need to have a clear positioning as to why we're relevant for the next, 5 to 10 years. And the interesting part is when you are in a large and commoditized market the size of this one, you cannot differentiate in technology, right? You have to differentiate with something else. So we cannot dominate go-to-market because our competitors are Amazons and all that. And of course, their go-to-market is much larger. So is IBM and VMware because they have their own sales forces that are infinitely bigger than ours, and the partnerships that are infinitely bigger than their own sales forces, right? So there's no way we can dominate in any of those. So we have to carve out a niche that's large enough so we can go from our 100 million to 500 to 1 billion. And luckily, it's very easy to find a niche of this size in this very, very large market. So the conjecture that I have is that the only niche where we can actually dominate is the one where we are open and we are preventing large and small companies from being dependent on one technological partner. And of course, if you look at the playbooks that all of these partners, all of those big vendors are doing, they're trying to lock you in. They're trying to have you use all of their technology stack. And then at every level, if you're not, they're going to make troubles for you. So they lock you in and they charge a huge margin as a result of that, right? And then they have all these very, very heavy go-to-market structures that will extract that margin from the customer. So customers are not very happy with this. And Mirantis, by leveraging tremendous amount of open source innovation that's happening in community where tens of thousands of engineers every day contributing to the innovation, we can bring the same amount of innovation, but deliver it in such a way that there will never be a dependence on just anybody. And then, of course, Mirantis has to out-execute on service, support, openness, the same things, like performance and security and all that needs to be table stakes. But then if we can prove it, customers will go to us because we give them optionality. Whereas the alternative gives them, holds them by the throat. And we have many, many customers where we are their second option. And the first option is Red Hat or IBM or what have you. But very, very large, the world's largest customers have us. And sometimes we have a larger footprint than Red Hat because when they call, we jump, right? And Red Hat won't. And second of all, because we make sure that we take other people components, put them in the stack and make sure it works robustly. So they have an option because the very moment they lose this option, Red Hat will just, gauge the price 5x and they're done. We're seeing this being played with VMware. Broadcom bought VMware, went to everybody, jacked the price 5x. Great for us because there's this huge outcry and people are going to cloud from virtualization, but customers don't want this again. And that's when you look at it at the size of this economy, of this market, it's a huge niche. It's not a billion, it's tens of billions of dollars. And Mirantis, by out-executing in that niche, has an unlimited amount of space to grow and create shareholder value.
Interesting. Good luck for Mirantis and yourself as CEO.
Thanks.
Maybe we can just go back to this open source, OpenStack and a bunch of other products in open source. Generally speaking, obviously, I don't need to ask whether you trust in open source. You do, because you were one of the early adopters of open source.
And contributors. We were the largest contributor to open source. We're top 10 of many, many projects in the world. Yes.
So speaking broadly, and I think that we can touch here a little bit in this Gen AI space, where there is a battle within the community of open source players like Stable Diffusion and Closed Loop like OpenAI and many others, right, who are joining. So based on your experience, and obviously 20 years ago when all this open source agenda started, and I'm a software engineer, as you know, and spent years in technology. There were like a lot of bets that open source will eat the world, and it hadn't yet so far, right? I mean, still there is a battle going on. Do you think it will ever be a win for open source? In what way? So we definitely see open source is very popular in emerging markets. India, for example, many other countries, growing economies, who basically do not want to depend on first particular vendors and then powers, right? So they choose open source on a political side. But do you think that this technology will evolve to an extent that indeed contribution of companies like yours will win big like a chunk of dollars being put into this by big techs? So how do you think this will evolve going forward?
So I think we have to define the ability, what does it mean winning, right? So I would argue that market share of open source probably is winning. And if you look, for example, especially in infrastructure, less so in applications, because applications are one-offs, right? And they're built specifically for use cases and they're not as reusable, right? So in applications, open source is very difficult to deploy, but infrastructure, it's kind of a winner take all type of game. And let's take a look at, simple things. Like let's look at operating system. What are the most prevalent operating systems that are running today in the data center? Well, the commercial one that's winning the most is Red Hat Linux, right? Which is arguably almost, closed source, or even though it's based on open source. But when you look at how many servers are running what, I will probably say that that Ubuntu, which is very open source, is probably more prevalent. And right now, Red Hat is killing CentOS, which was a free version of Red Hat, because the footprint of it is so large, they just want to squeeze them and get them back into the fold. But it's possible for those who have the money to pay, they will pay. The rest will go elsewhere. But Red Hat just wants to monetize, right? So if you're looking to monetize, the best way to monetize is to build a monopoly and then squeeze everybody when they have no choice, right? Then you're going to make a lot more money. So as an investor, you will argue whether you want to invest in open source or you want to invest in closed source. And the returns of closed source winners is much higher, but the probability to build a closed source winner is much lower. So it's a numbers game, right? So I think going forward, open source will continue to be a very, very important force, because to create massive innovation, you need a lot of resource. And very few companies can put that much resource to bear. And those companies are usually monopolies already. So if you want to have innovation happening in competition with those monopolies, you need to pool tens of thousands of different interests together, right? Which will then put marketing dollars to make sure there's awareness and engineering dollars to make sure it's built right into open source. And in infrastructure, I think more and more percentage of everything is going to be open source. And even if you look at Amazon or Microsoft, if you look at what is it that they're deploying, 90% of it comes from open source. And then they put their own secret sauce on it. It's just they're, some of them started contributing back too. Like you look at VMware, they contribute quite a lot, right? Amazon less so. But even for them, they can't outcompete open source.
So why are they putting their software into open source? What's the reason for that? Facebook is doing a lot of...
For compatibility, because if I build something based on, all those things, and I've done things and I'm doing my own way and I'm running a fork, and then 10,000 developers are doing something else, that means unless I put it there and make it part of whatever, I can no longer tap into it so that I can use it for next rev. And that means instead of leveraging work done by 10,000 people and making my stuff cheaper, I have to put my own 10,000 people, which is my cost. So that's why they're contributing from a very pragmatic point of view. And because of that, I say in the end, large ecosystems will be governed by foundations, for IP protection and all those other things, right? They will continue to innovate. And I think the change happened around circa 2010, where before that, open source was a commoditization play. All they did was created a cheap version of something expensive. But with the advent of, first of all, geographical dispersion, and then advent of agile development where people could do things remotely and, together, open source became a major, major innovation wave. And in infrastructure, all the big waves, all the big disruptions are actually all open source. I mean, look at OpenStack, arguably a huge disruption, but limited. Kubernetes, the biggest IT disruption of the century so far, right? Hadoop and all the big data technologies. All of this is coming from open source, right? And then you look at something like crypto, which is building its own infrastructure. Everything is open source. Everything. AI. So I'm not yet an expert there, but we're looking at this, of course, because the same people looking for AI are the same buyers who are buying our stuff today. So it's very relevant to us. But I think right now there is, especially on the training side, we're still in the competition of hyperscalers, where you need tremendous amount of infrastructure to actually build those foundational models to become useful. And it's not something that can be done by players other than those huge ones that can put billions of dollars to buy NVIDIA chips, right? But once you go further into inference and you have to deliver this on the edge and all that, then suddenly, again, being beholden to the monopolies can become very difficult, very dangerous for the same reasons I just described in the cloud wars. So Facebook played it very interestingly. They took Llama and made it completely open source, right? And they did it for a very pragmatic reason from what I'm hearing, because of course, they themselves are huge users of this, but this allows them to throw a monkey wrench into the plans of their public cloud competitors and create a viable product that others can start fiddling with. But again, it just confuses the market for competitors while Facebook is moving ahead with their strategy. But once we go into inference and edge, I think open source will start playing a much major role. And right now there is understanding which community, how they're going to work. It's kind of the early days, just like in the early days when we started and deciding whether to jump in open source, in OpenStack. There was OpenStack and CloudStack and OpenNebula and all those guys. And we chose the one with the largest community behind it. Right now, it's kind of early. So we will wait for another 6 months, a year, and see which community is building faster and where innovation is coming faster. And that's the one we're going to start backing up.
How do you think, if you think of 5-10 years evolution of DevOps and cloud businesses overall, what do you think are going to be breakthroughs in this business? Are there any new technologies evolving, something like new Kubernetes or new other kind of technologies which could just break through and bring some really new exciting opportunities for founders and companies to build upon?
Well, I think serverless, right? Where you build at level abstraction where you don't even care about infrastructure. And I think it's already becoming more and more prevalent. Now, underneath, you still have the same primitives, but the way developers are interacting with it is very different. I think it's going to get legs. And then, of course, Gen AI and ability to build applications automatically, right? And AI in DevOps.
No code, low code, right?
In some ways, yes. But no code, I think Gen AI will give it a whole new look, right? Where the role of developers are going to be very different. And people are talking about building software companies with maybe 1 or 2 people needed to do that.
What about DevOps? Will it eliminate also system engineers, system administrators, and DevOps task force?
Let's put it this way. A lot of conversations are out there saying that it will, but to me, it's the same conversations that at the beginning of this century, we said, we're not going to have programmers in the US because they're all going to be in India because India is cheaper. And try hiring a programmer in the US today. There is none available, right? Or people said, oh, it's all going to be public cloud because clearly these guys can innovate a million times better, and it's not. Well, it's the same conversation where it seems like, it's going to be that, but in reality, it will just create so much more variability and complexity that humans will need to manage it, but with much stronger tools and a much better automation. So I think the demand will be there. Demand will be even higher, but the requirements for what those people can do with these tools will also get much higher. So I don't think it's going to disappear.
Interesting. Okay, we spoke enough about cloud and DevOps and past and future. Let's switch to another topic, which you are definitely an expert in, and you built a few companies in blockchain space. So what's your stake on crypto and blockchain? Is it going to continue to be this speculative tool just for speculation and making easy money, or it's going to be at some point a real thing for real economy? So if you may just elaborate a little bit on why blockchain hasn't become yet this tool, this mean like cloud, right? I mean, we use cloud in everyday life, and we do not use blockchain in everyday life. And cloud and blockchain have 10 years apart, right? So cloud started in like early 2000, and blockchain was built, like this first blockchain was built in 2009, I think, right? So 10 years apart. Is blockchain taking over the same speed, you think, as cloud, or it's gonna like take a different route? So what's your take here?
So I would probably start by disagreeing with you a little bit. That they're 10 years apart, they're more like 20 years apart. Because what we're talking about with blockchain and crypto, and blockchain is just the name of a technology. It's not really that relevant here, but the sort of the crypto infrastructure, as we call it, which is blockchain based, started building circa 2010, whereas the internet as we know it was building in the, kind of in the 90s, in the early 90s. It's just it became well enough so you can deploy real things around it around the year 2000, right? And the internet became the main use case for that. And then the applications like search and social networking, they forced the cloud because the economics of building infrastructure the way, Visa or American Express or whatever buys infrastructure from Oracle and Suns and all that was unsustainable for that use case. So they had to build it differently, right? It was economy that was driving it, that allowed us to go into the internet world. So I think there is a reason blockchain is called Web3, because it's a new generation of infrastructure that works on different principles. And to me, crypto and blockchain is essentially a different economic model through which large, mostly consumer networks are developed. And I do believe that it's a disruption in the way things are built. And I do believe that it has a very, very significant future, and it will create tremendous value because things will be available that otherwise cannot be accomplished. And in some more traditional things, there'll be immense competition between the centralized and decentralized ways of doing things. And some centralized will win, and some decentralized will win, and then some they will coexist. Just like Airbnb is coexisting with the Marriott hotel chain doing just fine. So I do think we're just very early, but the level of accretiveness to the GDP of the world will be percentage-wise at least as much as what the internet gave us 20 years ago.
Interesting. So this revolution is still kind of very early stage, right? So it's not, we don't see it just because it's like very early evolution of it, right?
Well, just think about it. If you look at all the crypto companies combined today, the combined market cap, if you go to Coin Marketplace, the combined market cap of everything crypto is 2.3 trillion, which is pretty much like what? Google is like one company, right? So we're very, very early. And in there, we already have massive use cases and massive value creation that I don't know that the average person understands. I mean, the crypto kind of got a bad rap because there is all these manipulation and they're volatile and all that, and there's fraud and countries are afraid of that. It's all correct. But if you look at what is the medium in which the most amount of fraud is perpetrated, clearly it's US dollar, right? Just because the sheer size of it, right? And so doesn't make dollar unusable or not creating value, right? So
yeah, but you could not compare. I mean, crypto is not a mean of pay, right? It's not the mean of
but it's not what it's all
creating
about.
wealth, right? Yeah, so it's a little bit different mean, right?
Well, okay.
You could not build business with dollars, right? You just need to build to buy real stuff to build business. So you can pay dollars, but you need to buy brick and mortar, right, to build business or software or whatever.
Yes.
So blockchain is a mean to build, right? So this is a new brick and mortar, if you will, like cloud, right? You can build businesses on cloud. You could build businesses on blockchain. So do you think that this crypto speculation helps crypto economy to thrive, or it just stops use cases to deploy in real life world, right? For me, the speculation doesn't really help much, right? Because I was just talking the other day with founders, and then I just realized why crypto founders are different, right? Because they do ICO in the first day, and then they become rich first day, right? In Mirantis, you should work like 15 years to make an exit, and they can make an exit even without making any products, right? So they first do an exit and then deliver. And it doesn't help psychologically to deliver, right? Because when you have already money in hands, usually you do not work as hard as when you just need to earn that in 20 years, right? So, I mean, there is no pain in it. So no pain, no gain at the end.
I don't know. I actually think it's the other way around. And let me suggest a few ways, a few different ways to look at it. There were many, many things you said. So I'll start with the first one where you said that it's a means as opposed to a use case. Every time you have a new world, you start by building infrastructure, right? And building infrastructure in itself is valuable, right? That's why, Cisco became large and successful before use cases for internet were actually, designed, because a lot of money has been spent on Cisco to build the infrastructure. NVIDIA is now top 5 companies ever because people are building AI infrastructure and the use cases are still to be found. So usually, infrastructure is a precursor to, the use cases, right? Of course, you have to manage it correctly because there will be a chasm, right? And the valuations will go down, but it's extremely valuable to build infrastructure. Now, as far as liquidity and all that. So maybe, I'll start with kind of defining where I see value in crypto. And then we'll talk about why I think this is a game changer. So crypto to me is a mechanism that allows for very, very nuanced and well thought through incentive mechanisms for building large, complicated networks. And those networks can have multiple, very, very different purposes. But you create incentives and ability for contributors to bring themselves into the ecosystem and be paid specifically for the value that they deliver, right? And so let's take as an example an exchange, right? An exchange is a very valuable thing, whether it's, a company that you invested in or, New York Stock Exchange or what have you, right? It plays a very important purpose. It allows, for exchange of value and all that. To make an exchange, you have to have a trusted platform, right, that others are willing to transact with. It needs to have liquidity, right? It needs to have enough supply and demand on each side. And in today's world, exchanges are centrally owned. So they provide liquidity and they make money on margin, right? They provide security. They provide all kinds of things. And then they also allow only a certain number of people to participate in that. And others are completely locked out. So in a crypto world, you can have a decentralized exchange where suddenly you have the same ability to do, you have your supply and you have your demand, and you have your ability to transact. But each piece of that supply chain is actually delivered by a participant who can plug into the system, do this particular value add, and be paid specifically for that. So for example, if you need liquidity to actually transact, somebody can come in, and be a liquidity pool provider, be paid a percentage of a transaction for that. And they can be in Burundi or South America or anywhere they choose, right? And people who are trading can be everywhere as well. So suddenly those things that were only available to the walled garden monopolies are being open for everybody. And with the right economics, the whole world can just participate. So it opens up so much ability, so much value, that otherwise would just not available. And then the level of innovation is happening at every layer, at every level, that they just want to make it more efficient, better and better and better. And in the DeFi community, the number of use cases that are useful already is quite a lot. You have to pay.
Do this like this use cases interact with like real life day-to-day
Yes.
cases. Yeah.
So, I mean, the easiest one that everybody knows about is money transfer. Every time I have to do a money transfer through a bank, I have to pay $25 to $40, and you can do it for a fraction of a dollar if you use the underlying blockchain thing, right? So that's a simple case. Same with trading, and that's in DeFi. Well, FreedomFi, the company that I built and you've invested in, right? It's a very useful case, and there's a whole category now that is being formed called DePIN, stands for Distributed Physical Infrastructure. And we actually went to, after the telco industry and tried to build a distributed network in telco. And maybe I can go a little bit in the history because it's very related to Mirantis, right? To kind of see how we got there. But my co-founder Boris actually started FreedomFi, and then I joined them a few months later. But he started FreedomFi as a company that wanted to democratize infrastructure for telcos, the same way open source democratized infrastructure for enterprises. Telcos are still partaking in, Ericsson's and Nokia, where there's big boxes, kind of similar to what they used to be before, like during Sun days, right? Sun Microsystem days and HP UX and all that. So Boris had a somewhat naive idea that we just go and we do the same thing for telcos, and telcos one day will just become as quick and efficient as enterprises today are. And after slogging it for about a year, actually building decent revenue using Facebook as a go-to-market, we realized it's just way too slow. And then we decided to pivot this whole thing into crypto. And we found a company that built a IoT network using crypto economics. And during good times, the economics was very, very compelling. And within a year and a half, they've built a IoT network that spanned the whole world, more than 1 million devices. And it was the fastest that network was ever built and the cheapest. The only problem is an IoT was way too early and there were no customers. So they had supply, the network, but no demand. And they realized that they need to actually pivot to where all the data is going. And data is all on the mobile networks, right? So we then said, okay, we were building a distributed network, and we said, how about we pivot that and we make the same crypto economics available to people who are building mobile networks using CBRS radios. CBRS, for those who don't know, is an experiment that the US government is running. What's called Citizens Band Radio Network. It's an ability to have a radio that works on a free network where you don't have to buy a spectrum. And it's a small cell that is it's a radio, but it's not as powerful as the commercial radios that are used by AT&Ts and the like.
So basically you were disrupting mobile operators, right?
I don't think we were disrupting, but we were trying to have a different approach to building a mobile network. Because remember, the way mobile networks are built today is somebody like an AT&T would need to go put up multi-billion-dollar investment in spectrum, multi-billion-dollar investment in infrastructure and software and hardware and all that, then hire all these unionized workers, who will then kind of connect it all and support it all, put hundreds of billions of dollars to create coverage, and then start selling it piecemeal to you and me for like $100 a month, right? So it's a very inefficient business. So we said, why couldn't it be built bottoms up? The technology certainly is such that today kind of centralized boxes make very little sense now. As you go higher in spectrum, your things need to be closer. They need to be more of an edge setup, and doing it centralized is very, very expensive. So we said, how about we incentivize people to just take a little device, put it on their kiosk or, inside their coffee shop or on their roof at home, right? And create a thing, and then we will connect it all into a ubiquitous network, and we will basically manage this network kind of similarly to how Airbnb is managing the largest hotel network in the world. And by the way, there'll be no capex because the capex is going to be put up by the people actually building this network, but we have to give them economics where it's making sense. Now, the underlying economics is such that when you have a very large network that's usable, the value of the network is proportional to the square of the number of nodes. So the larger the network grows, the more valuable it becomes. So if we can float this to the market and market will believe that it's a valuable network, the value of the network can be the engine, financial engine that will actually fund the growth of the engine. And this is a tremendous financial innovation that creates real value. And so here's the use case, right? We have Helium Mobile. It's a plug, but it's a good one. Helium Mobile, which runs on top of T-Mobile. We have a partnership with T-Mobile. It's a service that works out, in the US, works as well as T-Mobile. It costs $20 a month. And yet, whenever there is a Helium location, it will actually roam to that and it will use our network. And the larger the network, the less we'll have to use the macro network, the more efficient it's going to become, and we'll be able to lower the price.
And FreedomFI is the part now of Helium, right?
Correct. So once we pivoted into crypto and just announced that we're going to mobile, and we announced that the product is going to be available in 6 months and people can get on a waiting list, we got 10,000 signups for a waiting list in 4 days, of which, they had to pay $100. So we got like over $1 million in prepayments, and we then closed the waiting list because we couldn't manage so many users. And the demand was so high that we saw that a price on our waiting list, a spot on our waiting list would be sold on eBay for $3,000. So, that's what happened. And so we then, had to build the technology, make sure it worked, proved it, sold it to tens of thousands of people with radios, got revenue through that, real revenue, actually raised a round, led by a small German VC called Blue Yard with Qualcomm, Samsung, Facebook, and a bunch of others participating, got oversubscribed. Obviously, you were part of that round as well. And then we actually ended up, 6 months later, decided to sell this because we wanted to kind of have a much larger resource to build the biggest player, right? And so we were in partnership with Helium that had the whole economics part figured out. They were already listed and all that. And so we combined forces and became part of the Helium ecosystem and were bought by a company called Nova Labs. And now Boris is still running mobile there. I was running strategy, and now a few months ago came back to run Mirantis again, but I'm participating. I'm still involved as a strategy guy at Helium, and it still continues to grow exponentially. So the jury is still out, but it's very, very real. The innovation is real, technology is real, usage is real, and it's just one little example.
It is also an example of how you can tokenize things and how you can create value through tokenization overall. So do you see tokenization is again a big thing that can change the world asset ownership and distribution in so many different cases? Do you believe that it will be allowed by states and regulators to tokenize everything, starting with real estate, ending up with commodities, shares and everything, so it will be completely decentralized and put into crypto infrastructure at some point?
So I think that tokenization can become a very useful tool, especially when the underlying costs of managing this resource and kind of the derivative value will be de-risked, and it will create new markets. Just like ETFs many years ago succeeded in doing the same thing, I think tokenization will be a derivative of ETFs. And I think in the developed markets, it will probably be late in coming. And if anything, tokenization will probably start from rare assets like tokenizing, fine art. If somebody wants to buy a Picasso, right, that will probably be something that will become a use case. Or it will come from more crypto-friendly developing nations that will want to create laws that will actually make tokenization much easier to use. And that will create use cases and technology that will then bleed into the developer. So that's would be my prediction, but I don't pretend like I'm a expert in tokenization.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. So we spoke a lot about software, DevOps, cloud, open source software, crypto. So we have to finalize our podcast, and I really like to ask a couple of personal questions. So what does motivate you? What wakes you up? What makes your life rich? What's your ambitions?
Well, I think I just enjoy the process of creation. And so long as I can work with people with whom, when we brainstorm ideas and come together, what's created is first in a thought form is a lot more than I could do myself. And then we have a way to actually make it real. That's sort of what drives me.
So you are from like 0 to 1. So you want to start a new thing, right?
Not necessarily. It can be from 2 to 6.
Okay.
In fact, if my partner,
if it is from 2 to 6, somebody else created it, right? And then
yes,
you follow.
and that's fine. But taking it to 6 again, so long as I can figure out a way to figure out a path, and that path is not just something that I did on my own, but I did it with others with whom, through collaboration, the new idea and value got created that we can then together build. I'm happy to apply myself there. It doesn't have to be 0 to 1.
Okay. Is there anyone whom you can call your hero, who you want to be, who like you want to copy? Maybe not copy, but at least get some kind of stuff from?
I don't have role models like that. I have hundreds, if not thousands of people whom I read or met or talked to who inspire me. But my belief is that, and who I really respect and love, but I believe that everybody's purpose in life is to be themselves. And ultimately, I try to carve a path that allows me to be the best version of me possible. And then I take from everybody through reading books or talking or thinking or all these mechanisms. And these people who contributed to my journey are too many to mention.
Okay, thank you. And maybe the last one. So how would you qualify a success? What does success mean for you?
I would say you've contributed to, through whatever palette you're able to use. In my case, as companies, as part of my creation, my palette, you've contributed more than you've taken back.
Okay, a surplus. Interesting. Okay, Alex. So thanks a lot for the discussion. We spent almost 1.5 hours together, and I really enjoyed it. So it went like a single minute, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it too. And it was really deep. So thanks for this deep dive into everything. And you're a true expert. You're my great friend and one of the most talented people I know. So keep going, and we will do something even greater things together. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And talking to you is always so much fun.
This was a podcast, Ventures from the Valley, brought to you by Victor Orlovski, R136 Ventures. Alex Freedland, founder and CEO of Mirantis, was with us today. Thank you. Ventures from the Valley is brought to you by R136 Ventures. To find out more about R136 Ventures and how we scale mid to late stage startups by unlocking their true potential through investment, visit r136.vc. We will be back soon. In the meantime, make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any further episodes. On behalf of our team here at R136 Ventures, thanks for listening.